Welcome back, y'all. This is more ggplot part 3 from the week 5 notes and information. So we're looking at actually using ggplot to create a scatter plot. And remember that a scatter plot has to be for at least 2 quantitative variables. Some of the plots that we made earlier you may have thought were a scatter plot earlier in the semester, but they were actually 1 variable and it was a bar graph without the bars. So this is a scatter plot for 2 quantitative variables, and we actually have added in a 3rd variable in the plots that we're making today, which is state. And so things are being colored by state. I am also now going to add in a 4th variable to show you what that will look like. So as I said in the last video, y'all are looking at vaccination percentages and comparing that to right now. We're going to do, instead of deaths like we did in the last video, we're going to do new cases. And we're going to create a scatter plot to see if there's a relationship between those things. So I'm going to walk you through the code, show you the plot, the scatter plot, and then I'm going to start making changes so you can kind of see. One thing I want to comment on before I do this, the very first time I showed you the ggplot, I told you that you could just add in layers, and I did that in that video by making whole new plots. Here I am still adding in layers. You can see the plus signs, but because I'm more comfortable with my skills for doing this, I don't create new plots every time. You can still do it that way. There's nothing wrong with that. You can make new objects each time, and then you can check to make sure things are working correctly. I'm just doing it this way because I'm a little bit more comfortable with my skills, but it's not actually different from what I showed you the first time. I'm just not making objects. Okay, so data, calling out vaccinations and deaths, or vaccines and deaths. I'm mapping. I'm still having my explanatory variable on the x-axis, and that's that series complete population percent. And then I'm going for my y-axis, the new case rate, which you can see I made that variable, and it's the same way that I made the variable for death rate above, or what we talked about on the last video. And then I'm coloring each of the points by state. So that's my 3rd variable. Now here in this geom point is where I'm adding in the 4th variable. So I'm telling it to use the shape 20, which if you remember from the last video, I gave you a table. So this is going to be a circle, but I'm telling it to size the dot. So this is my 4th variable by the population size. So you'll notice that states that are larger will have larger circles versus smaller states with smaller populations will have smaller circles. And then I'm labeling each of those points with the name of the state, and I'm choosing to do the text color as black, and it's going to be a size 2. And then I'm labeling the whole graph. And then down here, this legend position equals none. I'm telling it not to include the legend, because that's not necessarily necessary when we have the states already labeled on the graph, and there's so many states it looks stupid. And then here we have a label for the y-axis and a label for the x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to run all of this. I want it to be nice so you can see everything. Now you can see that we have Vermont up here, but because it's a smaller population, it's got a smaller circle. Whereas down here, if you see California, it's got a larger circle because the population is larger. You can also see, interestingly enough, Vermont went from the highest vaccinated with the lowest death rate to the highest vaccinated with the highest new number of cases, which is interesting. I'm wondering what's happening there, because clearly that's an outlier. The rest of it, for the most part, it actually is the reverse of what you would expect to see. You would expect to see that the higher the vaccination rate, the lower the number of new cases. So you would expect to see a negative association, so moving this way. Same as what we saw with the death rate, but here you actually don't see much of a relationship between vaccination percent and the percent of new cases. It doesn't seem that the number of the percent vaccinated is actually affecting the new case rate, which is interesting. It might be easier to see if that Vermont wasn't up there because it would be zoomed in a little bit more, but for the most part, any direction that I see, it appears to be a positive association, which is quite interesting. Okay, now I'm going to affect some change on this graph, and I just want to show you kind of what changes are possible. So I can change this size of the text so it can be a little bit easier to read. Maybe it will not, and it will be too big, and change that to a 4. So now you see that those are starting to overlap. So there is a downfall to having the font be bigger and readable, because then they start to overlap. Like down here, you've got kind of a hot mess. So I'm going to move that back to 2. And then if you want to also, if you wanted to see that legend and remember what that legend looks like, I just am commenting that out, which means it's not going to include that code. And that's why this time you actually see the legend. That's not helpful. That's why I took that out. So I'm going to take the legend out again. And then you can also see that I can change this if I did maybe a 5 and see. And really the goal here is to create the best looking graph. And I don't really like it when they're not filled in, because my goal with this, and I could maybe take this size out, but my goal with this was so you would have a circle that kind of encompassed the sorry, I have to work before I think. Let's do 10 there. A circle that encompassed the name of the state, because it actually made it a little bit easier to read. So you could do it this way too, and you can see now actually, I like that the best and not having the population size in there, because you can read those states much easier, and the circle actually is going around the name of the state, which makes it kind of a nice graph. So in the next video, so this is the scatter plot. This is the best looking one I think I could make right now for this. I could maybe change the scale, but I've played with the scale of the x-axis and the y-axis, and it's because of that Vermont, I'm not able to do a whole lot with it. So this is a nice graph. I like how it turned out. I think it's aesthetically appealing. I think that it's informative and you can read things easily. This is your goal for this week. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to put a theme on your Markdown document.